Hare Krishna. Om Ganatimirandasya Gananjana Shalakaya Chakshurunmilitam Yena Tasmai Sri Gurave Namaha. Jai Sri Krishna Chaitanya Prabhu Nityananda Sri Advaita Gadadhar Srivasadi Gaur Bhaktivinoda. Hare Krishna, Hare Krishna, Krishna Krishna, Hare Hare, Hare Rama, Hare Rama, Rama Rama, Hare Hare. I received an interesting question from a very nice devotee, Madhava Mohini Devi Dasi. And I thought, yes, let's deal with it. There's an outer way to answer this question and an inner way, and both are very important. She's asking about Maharaj Bharat, fifth canto. So we'll deal with that question and then we'll get back into Bhakti Rasamrita Sindhu, the qualities of Krishna. Tonight we'll try to get into Krishna as the reservoir or source of all mystic powers. And we'll see how far we get. Speaking about the examples of Krishna as Yogeshvara that Rupa Goswami gives from Bhagavatam. But first, Maharaj Bharat. You know him from Nectar of Devotion fame. He's used as an example for one of the 9 characteristics of preliminary ecstatic love. He just dropped everything, although he had such opulence and such wonderful family life. He, as the king, dropped everything, just like someone would abandon defecation after having passed it. He attained the platform of preliminary love of Krishna. But then something happened. In the forest, as he's practicing his spiritual life, he became a highly advanced devotee. An incident happened, you know. He was on the bank of a river meditating on the Supreme Personality Godhead, and a pregnant deer was drinking water from the river. And suddenly there was a loud roar from a lion. And the deer jumped across the river. Small river, no doubt. She was so frightened that as she jumped across this small river or stream, her child was born prematurely, just popped out of the womb into the rushing waters. Maharaj Bharat rescued that newborn deer from the water. And when he saw what happened to the mother, he could see that she had died from shock. So he began to take care of the deer, investing his all in all into it. In fact, He got too much into it. Mm. He neglected his spiritual practices. He invested the affection, the enormous affection that he had for his wife and children that he had left behind in that famous example. He invested all that into the little deer. So much so that the situation was like he was in material love with the deer, like the little deer was his son. The Bhagavatam describes the situation. And for those of you who haven't read this section of the fifth canto in a long time, you'll it's mesmerizing how beautiful and poetic the presentation of Bharat Maharaj's bewilderment is, how descriptive. We'll read just a few verses. Gradually, Maharaj Bharat became very affectionate toward the deer. He began to raise it and maintain it by giving it grass. He was always careful to protect it from the attacks of tigers and other animals. When it itched, he petted it, and in this way he always tried to keep it in a comfortable condition. He sometimes kissed it out of love. Being attached to raising the deer, Maharaj Bharat forgot the rules and regulations for the advancement of spiritual life, and he gradually forgot to worship the Supreme Personality of Godhead. After a few days, he forgot everything about his spiritual advancement. So you see, just after a few days, the neglect of his sadhana set in. He fed the deer grass, protected it from wild animals, gave affection by petting it, fondling it with kisses. He became so attached to the deer. As I said, the very person who left untold opulence and family satisfaction, left it so cleanly. Now it seems all that attachment has burst out of him and focused on the little deer. Those of you who remember our discussions about Daksha and Narada may say, this is Daksha's point. Premature renunciation. This is why he cursed Narada Muni. But the situation of Maharaj Bharat is a bit complex. He had everything going for him spiritually. But somehow he chose to just drop his spiritual practices and dive into this material attachment. He's demonstrating something, but we'll get more into the inner reasons later. Let's hear more about how he buried himself into this attachment, amazingly. The great king, Maharaj Bharat, began to think, alas, this helpless young deer, by the force of time, an agent of the Supreme Personality of Godhead, has now lost its relatives and friends and has taken shelter of me. It does not know anyone but me, as I have become its father, mother, brother, and relatives. This deer is thinking in this way, and it has full faith in me. It does not know anyone but me. Therefore, I should not be envious and think that for the deer, my own welfare will be destroyed. I should certainly raise, protect, gratify, and fondle it. When it has taken shelter with me, how can I neglect it? Even though the deer is disturbing my spiritual life, I realize that a helpless person who has taken shelter cannot be neglected. That would be a great fault. So one of Madhava Mohini Devi Dasi's questions was that, well, what's wrong with a devotee being compassionate upon a creature like the deer? Why is Marge Bart subject to such criticism? That's the first part of her questions. No, there's nothing wrong with a devotee feeling soft hearted and compassion, but we have to know how to apply it. Srila Prabhupada points out in the purport that it's natural that as a devotee advances in bhakti, the heart softens and he or she feels compassion for all living entities. Just like during this COVID-19 pandemic, naturally we feel aggrieved by the suffering of so many persons, the death of so many persons. Although, as I pointed out the other day during our discussions, just 100 years ago, 50 to 100 million persons died from the so-called Spanish flu, and 1/3 of the world's population at that time was infected. The question is how to apply our compassion. Not that we should have a stone heart. We have to know how to be soft hearted, how to be caring, how to be loving. If our compassion is simply focused on the body, that's a fall down from the spiritual platform for the devotee. Yes, we care about persons' bodily suffering, but at the same time, we know that the most important care is for their real self, the non material self. If we're actually feeling compassion, then we should help elevate people to spiritual consciousness. That's real compassion instead of the shadow or the rind of compassion, and not the rind and not the pulp. Yes, there was no harm in Bart Maharaj scooping the suddenly born little deer out of the water. But what could he do in terms of elevating a deer to spiritual life? He couldn't do that. So one has to know how to draw the line. He sacrificed his spiritual practices for the sake of giving material comfort to a deer. No doubt he should have scooped the deer up out of the river and let the deer go on its way. But to neglect his spiritual practices and gradually neglect his puja, his worship of the Supreme Personality of Godhead, this shows there's a problem. In other words, how can we help others if we haven't properly helped ourselves? We ourselves have to follow the rules and regulations, and then we can be a rescue mission for others. And when you study the verses in this eighth chapter of the fifth canto, you see that Marge Bart was totally absorbed in the bodily affairs of the little deer. And he's rationalizing brilliantly, beautifully. This his rationalizations compete with Arjuna's in the first chapter of Bhagavad Gita. They're both first class. But you know how Krishna dissected Arjuna's version of compassion. Marge Bart was putting himself in the role of savior of the deer. I'm not envious, so why shouldn't I sacrifice my own spiritual interests for the sake of the deer? The deer has come to me to take shelter. Yes, my spiritual practices are dissipating. Yes, I'm forgetting to do my puja, but I shouldn't be hard hearted. I must put my all in all into this creature. Sometimes our devotees face this kind of challenge in terms of relatives, their own family, their babies, their husband, their wife. For the so called sake of a supposed higher cause, one drops one's spiritual practices to please the other person or to have more time, supposedly, to invest in the other person. This little baby is my all in all. I can pour my heart into this babe. Why should I be envious and take time to chant Hare Krishna, thus neglecting the babe who needs me so much? Or I have a relative who, maybe a mother, father, sister, brother, who's very disturbed by my bhakti activities. The best thing for me to do is just reduce my bhakti activities or stop them completely. So many of us have been through such situations in beginning our bhakti. Yes, I also had such a situation. And the universal mantra that is intoned is, well, Krishna wouldn't want to hurt anyone. And if I act in a certain way for the sake of spiritual development, someone will be hurt, and Krishna wouldn't want that. I don't know how many times I've heard this in how many places around the world. How to be soft hearted and compassionate with intelligence based on knowledge. That is the issue here. Otherwise, in the name of philanthropy and humanitarianism, thisism, thatism, family ties, we feel compassion in an inappropriate and unauthorized way. The physician has to save himself, herself first. We have to know what is the real welfare activity. And if we abandon our own capacity and purity for giving the genuine welfare work, then how are we of any good to others and to our own self? So we sacrifice our real self interest and their self interest because we can't do any good for them, but to speak of do good for ourselves. Verse after verse, you hear about how Marge Bart just went deeper and deeper into affection for the deer, thinking of the deer. Is the deer angry at me? Has the deer forgotten me? Let me pretend I'm doing my puja, and let's see if the deer tries to interrupt me. I'll fake it that I'm in meditation, in samadhi, just to provoke the little deer. Ah, now I feel the little deer prodding me with its soft horns, wanting me to pay attention. Oh, how nice this is. This is intense. It reminds me of, remember we started reading a list of symptoms of bewildered love to give us better appreciation of how material affairs are a perverted reflection of Krishna's Leelas. Remember, there was the LO, the love object, and the LP, the love possessed person. We read about the first 8 or 9, I believe. But there's more. And indeed, you see how material existence is the perverted reflection of the spiritual world. Everything is there in Krishna, perfect and complete. Romance, family life, friendship, everything is there. How can we try to make Krishna into some impersonal force with no name, form, qualities, activities? We'll read a few more. And those of you who know something of Krishna Lila will recognize these characteristics of bewildered love in Krishna's most confidential affairs. Here's one. Changing priorities. The lovers rearrange their lives to accommodate each other. Whatever he or she likes, I like. Looking for clues. When the lovers aren't sure their love is returned and fully cherished, they search hypersensitively for any clues the love object may send, listening for a knock on the door, waiting for the phone to ring or the Facebook message to come. Because of strong attraction, the lovers dissect each other's actions, looking for clues about the true feelings of the day. And then there's emotional dependence. I am his or hers from head to foot. When out of touch, because the emotional dependence is so great, the lovers suffer terrible separation anxiety. And then, of course, there's empathy. I feel happy when the love object is happy, and vice versa. I laugh the love object's joy and cry the love object's grief. And if there's any adversity, any impediments to the relationship, external impediments, that feeds the flame, any social or physical barriers kindle the flame. Interestingly, even arguments and temporary breakups can be stimulating. And difficulties make the two love that much harder. When the relationship has a setback, I just try harder to make it right again. There's hope against hope. when the dice of life roll and situations come up repeatedly against the lovers. It all sounds in its perfection like what goes on in Braj Leela, but it's pathetic in the material world, on the material plane, as we falsely identify with the body and mind. There's emotional yearning that surpasses everything, even physicality. There's jealousy, which is known amongst poets as the nurse of love. It is said, she who can't feel jealousy can't feel love. Find all that imperfection totally 100% pure in Krishna's affairs. And then there's a feeling of everything being involuntary about the whole relationship. I can't help myself. I love you and no one else. It wasn't planned. It's uncontrollable. It must be love. Such a magnetic pull. And it's like a wild ride. Reciprocated and unreciprocated love. Both are a wild ride, a tumult of widely different motivations, widely different emotions that mix and permutate and separate and combine. And then finally, it's all transient in the material world. The fire in the heart diminishes. The magic fades. Then the two are just left with the daily rituals and habits of togetherness, like two persons running together a not-for-profit organization. Marge Bart, amazingly, took all those symptoms of bewildered love and focused them on a little deer. So Madhava Mohini Devi Dasi's second question is, how could someone so advanced do that? There is always independence, and this is a hard point for some to swallow. Bhakti is not forced. And yes, Bharat Maharaj was highly advanced, almost to the point of perfectly pure love of God. But he voluntarily took a wrong turn, willfully. It wasn't that he was ambushed or overpowered by material circumstances and no, with full consciousness he chose. That teaches us a lesson, that at every step of our spiritual life we have to be careful and always analyze our motives and our actions. As it's sometimes said in the field of political science, vigilance is the price you pay for real liberty. Of course, on the material plane, there's no real liberty. But political scientists have many slogans like that. Vigilance is the price for freedom. Democracy dies in the darkness. And but for spiritual life, vigilance is indeed a price to be paid. And it seems so inconvenient, especially at this stage in Kali Yuga. Why do I always have to be concerned about my motives, my desires, my association, what my mind and senses are doing? Oh, give me a break. On and on and on it goes. And it seems that in material life you can just let everything go, which is not the case. Here we are locked down due to COVID 19, and we're still thinking, oh, where's my freedom? When can I do what I want? So Bart Maharaj is demonstrating, and we'll get more into that later. He's demonstrating misuse of free will 100%. Now, if you want to get technical about it, for those who want to really pry behind the scenes, the Acharyas point out that the whole entanglement, ensnarement of Bart Maharaj wasn't the result of ordinary karma. It was the result of the Supreme Personality of Godhead arranging situations so that Bart would increase his love. Now you would say, wait a minute now. Here he is at the preliminary stage of love of God, and then he falls down due to attachment for this little deer. He dies, and in his next birth, he becomes a deer himself. And then in the next birth, he's the Avaduta, Jud Bharat. Is this how Krishna brings us closer to him by putting us through all that? No, the Acharyas point out. It's not ordinary karma. It's something special arranged. But still, you say, special or not, who wants to go through all that? Is he advanced or is he not? If he's way up there, then why does he plummet? Hmm. We have to know something more about the situation as the airplanes are flying overhead because the huge New Zealand military is practicing night flying. They have an airfield nearby the temple. So we're going to turn to Brihad Bhagavatamrita, where Sanatana Goswami talks about situations like that of Bart Maharaj. In his verses, Sanatana Goswami's verses, and his commentary, as presented so wonderfully by His Grace Gopi Prananda Prabhu, you get some fascinating insight. Mahashaya Yehari Nama Sevaka Sugopya Tad Bhakti Mahanade Swayam Prakasha Bhitya Vyavahara Bangibi Swadosha Dukkan Yanu Darsha Yantite. The great souls who spontaneously serve the names of Lord Hari fear to reveal the vast treasure of his confidential devotional service. So they behave in peculiar ways to show their own faults and unhappiness. What's that all about? So in Sanatana Goswami's commentary, we get the explanation. What about advanced worshippers like Bharat Maharaj, whose impending sinful reactions apparently kept going on? We should understand that when saintly devotees like Bharat, deeply absorbed in the moods of loving service to the Lord, seem to exhibit material attachment, as when Bharat became obsessed with the care of an infant deer, and when they seem to fall into bad association and miserable conditions, as when Bharat took his next birth as an animal, they are only pretending to be materially affected in order to keep the confidential moods of devotional service hidden from public view. Such devotees would rather be treated with undeserved contempt than honored and worshipped. And we look at the next verse. Tanama Sankirtana Matrato Kila Bhakta Hareshwar Hata Dukkha Dushana Ke Chittatapi Prabhuvat Kripakula Lokan Sat Acharam Imam Prashasati. All the devotees of the Lord are freed from contamination and misery simply by the Sankirtana of his names. Yet some devotees, as disturbed by compassion as the Lord himself, act in these ways to teach people civilized behavior. The motivation is compassion, pushed by compassion, just as the Lord himself acts on compassion. Such devotees act in apparently odd ways just to teach by example. Let's hear from the commentary. Shouldn't advanced devotees, in order to deliver the world from ignorance, let everyone see their greatness? Yes, but the so-called anomalous behavior of Vaishnavas like Bharat Maharaj is in fact their way of teaching sadachara, civilized human behavior. By the examples of their own lives, they show the consequences of violating the laws of God and material nature. For if people fail to learn how to act according to civilized standards, their hearts will remain contaminated by sinful desires, and they will never become inclined toward the Lord's devotional service. So Bharat Maharaj was showing, if you're inattentive in your spiritual life, there are consequences. In other words, you can't think that, oh, now I've become a devotee for so many years of such stature, I can do what I like. No. Vigilance is the price for freedom from material nature. So this chapter in the 5th canto, chapter 8, is so poetic, so beautiful. It really gets under your skin, it gets into your mind, into your senses. It's more expansive than Arjuna's presentation in the first chapter of Bhagavad Gita. Oh, Krishna, we can't do this because of reason X, Y, and Z, and on and on and on. And how can you think we can do this, Krishna? What kind of good can ever come about it? I see only evil happening. Families will be destroyed. This, that, the other. On and on he went. But I dare say, Bharat Maharaj, in the 8th chapter of the 5th canto, he wins the prize. And now we find out. There are hints in Prabhupada's purports, of course, but now we find out the scoop from Sanatan Goswami that it's all a show for our benefit, and the show is instigated by compassion. Bharat Maharaj is, out of compassion, showing us what misplaced compassion is all about. And he rationalizes. As I said, he rationalizes so beautifully. He's got all the points covered, all the bases covered. I have to focus completely on this deer. That's what a real compassionate person would do. This deer has trusted me. When he didn't see the deer around him, he would blame himself. Oh, that deer is so faithful, but I am so incompetent. The deer is teaching me a lesson by not being around me. How hard hearted I am. I'm failing in my responsibilities. Oh, it went on and on. Like the love object, the LO, and the LP, the love possessed. And this is, as we said, this is the person who left most beautiful family life and untold royal opulence. There's more. Dusanga dosham bharatadayo yata. Duryuta dosham cha yudhistira daya. Brahma swabhitam tanigadayo mala. Pradarsayan swa vyavaharato janan. As we're still, by the way, reading from Brihad Bhagavatamrita Sanatana Goswami. If you don't have Brihad Bhagavatamrita and you have sufficiently read all of Prabhupada's books, I certainly advocate, more than recommend, I advocate you read. You get a hold of the BBT version of Brihad Bhagavatamrita, 3 volumes. And after that, get a hold of the BBT version of Laghu Bhagavatamrita, Rupa Goswami's Science of the Avatars. And hopefully, despite all the lockdowns and virus situations, we'll have some volumes of Bhakti Rasamrita Sindhu available maybe the end of this year. All right. Back to Brihad Bhagavatamrita. Text 172. As Bharat and others showed the fault of bad association, Yudhisthira and others the fault of gambling, and Nriga and others the fear caused by taking a Brahmana's property, pure souls generally use their own behavior to teach the people. Interesting. You might have wondered, why is Yudhisthira gambling? I just heard a very interesting Prabhupada memory yesterday about how in the early days Prabhupada was in Switzerland and evidently he had BBT funds there for printing books. And somehow one of his assistants in his entourage very skillfully exchanged all the cash in the account for gold because he had astutely figured out that the USA was going to abandon the gold standard under its president at the time. They were going to detach the US dollar from real gold, and that would make the price of gold soar. So, and it was true. This devotee had figured it out and made more money for Prabhupada for his books. But when Prabhupada found out, he was furious. He called leaders to come to Switzerland in the middle of the night. He had a meeting, and devotees were mystified. Wow, this Prabhu figured out how to make more money. He's right. But Prabhupada's point was that this is gambling. We do not compromise our principles for anything. But the devotees were thinking, but he made more money. The money, the original money is there and more. No, Prabhupada wouldn't budge. This is breaking the regular principles. This is gambling, financial speculation, in other words. That was in the middle of the night. That morning, Prabhupada himself and these devotees involved went to the bank, and Prabhupada sold the gold and put all the money back the way it was before. In other words, rectifying the situation. He was so disturbed that this is gambling. We do not break our regular principles for anything. So we're reading in this verse from Brihad Bhagavatamrita how Yudhisthira demonstrated the fault of gambling. You might have wondered, what's Yudhisthira? Dharmaraj himself, Dharma personified. What's he doing getting caught up in a gambling match? Even though, yes, he's a Kshatriya, but still. He's showing the problematic nature of gambling. And what about Maharaj Nriga? You know him from Krishna Leela. He got in trouble gifting cows to brahmanas, and one of the countless cows he had gifted wandered on into the herd of another brahmana, and so the first brahmana started arguing with the second brahmana, and Nriga Maharaj was saying, "Look, I can give countless more cows to both of you. There's no problem." But no, the brahmanas cursed him. So here, Sanatana Goswami is explaining the internal dynamics. Maharaj Nriga is demonstrating how we should be fearful of confiscating property belonging to a real brahmana. Similarly, Bharat is showing the fault of bad association. He wrongly associated with this little deer. Commentary. Bharat Maharaj showed by his own life the danger of wrong association. Although almost perfectly devoted and renounced, he was distracted into caring for a newborn deer and therefore had to suffer birth as a deer. A similar case is that of Saubhari Rishi, who was deviated from meditation by seeing two fish engaged in sex. Remember that? Ninth canto, Saubhari Rishi saw two fish procreating, and that broke his meditation. He was submerged underwater. He was a mystic yogi. And by staying underwater, in the depths of the water, he could be undisturbed and be locked into his samadhi. But then he saw these two fish carrying on, and his mind got agitated. So here we find out that this is also a demonstration. Actually, who's speaking these verses that we're reading in Brihad Bhagavatamrita? It's the Vaikuntha Dutas, the messenger staff of Vaikuntha. They're saying that actually all these elevated souls were faultless. The third part of Madhava Mohini Devi Dasi's question is, why didn't the super soul save Bharat Maharaj? Oh, we love to blame Krishna. Oh, blame Krishna, blame super soul, blame the guru, blame the devotees. We've got to play the blame game. Well, I think we've answered a lot of that question by showing how this is drama, Bharat Maharaj's situation. And Prabhupada doesn't want us to lose the focus in terms of how Bharat voluntarily chose Maya and thus got some reaction for his purposely tossing away his spiritual life. But then again, in his next life as a deer, he had full memory of his previous birth. And as a deer in his next life, he didn't hang out with the other deer. He stayed aloof, frequented an ashram area. So the point that Prabhupada wants us to focus upon is that we should never think we're so advanced that we can do this or that, slacken our spiritual practices, especially for the sake of misapplied compassion, misconceived compassion. It's not that bhakti is about having a hard heart, but it's about how to be soft hearted, loving, and caring in the best way. We'll take a quick look at Bhakti Rasamrita Sindhu. I don't know how much we'll be able to get into it tonight. Hmm. So we're dealing with quality 55. Krishna possesses all mystic powers. Sarva Siddhi Nishevita. He who controls all mystic powers is called Sarva Siddhi Nishevita, or one who is served by all siddhis, all mystic perfections. What we can talk about tonight is that there are 8 Mahasiddhis, topmost mystic perfections, and they are served by 10 companion siddhis, mystic perfections. And of those 10, 5 are superior and 5 are considered inferior. You'll find these spoken about in the 11th canto, Srimad Bhagavatam. Primary and secondary mystic perfections. maybe we'll go to Bhagavatam and go over that list. It's important, and because you may wonder, why is this in Bhakti Rasamrita Sindhu, the ocean of loving devotion? It's important to know about these mystic perfections because for one who desires Shuddha Bhakti, pure devotional service, the achievement of these mystic perfections is a waste of time. Why? Because they distract one from loving relationship with Krishna. So the acharyas point out that all these mystic perfections are automatically offered to a pure devotee, but such a devotee doesn't accept them unless they can be useful for Sanatana Yoga, devotional service. What to speak of the Mahasiddhis, the greatest mystic perfections? A pure devotee doesn't even accept living on the same planet as the Lord, sharing the opulences of the Lord, being a personal associate of the Lord, having the same form as the Lord, and certainly never liberation into the impersonal Brahman. So of those 4 out of 5, the devotee only accepts them if there's some reason to do so for Krishna's service. In fact, there's so many verses in the Shastra in which devotees point out how useless are mystic perfections. A devotee simply depends on Krishna everywhere and anywhere, depending completely on him. This is from the 15th chapter of the 11th canto, and the Supreme Personality of Godhead is explaining to Uddhava this knowledge. The idea is that by hearing about these mystic perfections, someone who wants to be a pure devotee rejects them. That's the point. So the Supreme Personality of Godhead explains. The masters of the yoga system have declared that there are 18 types of mystic perfection and meditation, of which 8 are primary, having their shelter in me, and 10 are secondary, appearing from the material mode of goodness. So about the Ashtasiddhi, the 8 mystic perfections, the greatest ones, Krishna is the shelter. They emanate from his personal potency, and they are fully developed only within the Supreme Personality of God in himself and his personal associates. So when you see materialistic persons mechanically acquiring such potencies, you'll just, and you won't, it'll be very hard to see that these days in the age of Kali. But if you did, which Bhagavatam is explaining that such abilities are there only in an inferior degree and are considered to be manifestations of Maya, the illusory energy. A pure devotee doesn't need even the greatest mystic powers because through his execution of devotional service, the Supreme Personality of Godhead invests wonderful potencies. That's completely different from someone mechanically endeavoring to acquire mystic perfections for the purpose of sense gratification, fame, profit. So Vishwanath Chakravarti Thakur points out that the Ashtasiddhis, the eight mystic perfections, the greatest ones, arise from the Srup Shakti of the Supreme Personality Godhead, the internal potency. They're not material. The other 10 cities derive from the modes of material nature, like Sattva Guna. So, what are the 8 primary mystic perfections? There are 3 by which someone can transform their own body. Anima, becoming smaller than the smallest. Mahima, becoming greater than the greatest. Lagima, becoming lighter than the lightest. And then there are the acquisition mystic perfections. Prapti, one can acquire whatever one desires. Prakamya siddhi, one experiences any enjoyable object, no matter what universe. And then there are the manipulative mystic perfections. Ishita siddhi, one can manipulate the subpotencies of Maya. Subpotencies, not Maya itself, but subpotencies. And then there's the controlling potency called Vashita siddhi. One is even unimpeded by the 3 modes of material nature. Doesn't mean you're out of the 3 modes of material nature completely, but you just can control maximally and manipulate maximally. And then Kama Visayata siddhi. One can obtain anything from anywhere to the highest possible limit. You can see this is all great for greedy persons who are willing to perform severe austerities for how many lifetimes. Krishna tells Uddhava, my dear gentle Uddhava, these 8 mystic perfections are considered to be naturally existing and unexcelled within this world. By having the material equivalents of these mystic perfections, you can't escape the control of illusion. You can play around with the sub-potencies, sub-departments of illusion, but you can't get out. In Krishna, these 8 mystic potencies exist to the superlative degree. You know how Krishna becomes so small he can enter into even the atom as Paramatma. He becomes so large that as Mahavishnu he emanates countless universes. So many ways like this. Krishna is Yogeshvara, the Lord of all mystic potencies. Indeed, Yogeshvareshvara, the master of the masters of mystic potencies. So then there are secondary mystic perfections. We'll run through them quickly. And these secondary 10 arise from the modes of material nature. We'll read them quickly. The powers of freeing oneself from hunger and thirst and other bodily disturbances. Hearing and seeing things far away. moving the body at the speed of the mind, assuming any form one desires. Remember, so many of Kamsa's henchmen could do that? Entering the bodies of others, dying when one desires. Bhishmadev. Witnessing the pastimes between the demigods and the celestial girls called Apsaras. Completely executing one's determination and giving orders whose fulfillment is unimpeded. The power to know past, present, and future. We make such a big thing out of that, but it's considered a very inferior mystic power. Tolerance of heat, cold, and other dualities. Knowing the minds of others. Again, reading minds is considered to be so fascinating, but it's considered here to be so inferior. Checking the influence of fire, sun, water, poison, and so on. And remaining unconquered by others. The last five are considered by the acharyas to be quite inferior. To the previous five, and what to speak of the eight, the Ashtasiddhi. The last five are considered quite inferior to everything else because they simply involve manipulating physical and mental stuff. That's all. So when we go back to Bhakti Rasamrita Sindhu, we get examples of mystic powers in relation to Krishna. So we'll leave you with this thought. Dashabhi Siddha Sakibir Vrita Mahasiddhaya Kramad Asto Animadayo Labante Navasaram Dwari Krishnasya. The eight great cities, remember those, served by 10 companion cities, one after another. Remember, we just read those? Do not have the opportunity to enter the door of Krishna's palace. That puts everything into perspective. They can't even enter the door of Krishna's palace. So we'll continue discussing Krishna's mystic power next time. Give you a hint, an appetizer, that Krishna has inconceivable powers. Yes, it does mean he's the divine creator, maintainer, and destroyer. It also means he can bewilder even Lord Brahma and Lord Shiva, and even Balaram. And another symptom of his inconceivable powers is that he can destroy the karma that manifests in his devotees from their past, their prarabdha karma. He has the ability to destroy that. It's an interesting mystic power. All right. We look forward to discussing with you again. Thank you very much. Hare Krishna.